Right, good evening everybody. Welcome to the Council Annual General Meeting. The first item on tonight's agenda is apologies. Have we got any apologies for absence? A full house, well done. Are there any declarations of interest? Chris? Sorry, Councillor Poulter.
Can I just clarify, in relation to the item on the independent remuneration panel, there's an obvious declaration of interest for every councillor. Do we need to declare that at this point, or are you happy to deal with that?
Mayor, under the statutory provisions for allowances, that you do not need to declare interest on members' allowances, otherwise you won't be able to make decisions. Yeah.
The next item is minutes of the meeting of Council held on the 6th of March. Will somebody move these? Councillor Rawson, would you like to move them? Thank you very much. Is there a seconder? Thanks, very good. All in favour? That's carried. Thank you. Any against? Sorry, I should have said that. No, okay. Announcements from me. Thank you all very much for attending this morning. Most of you are there. It was a very interesting experience for me, and I'm glad to see that we're all going ahead now. You'll find some additional papers which were circulated earlier today. I think you've all got them. Appointments to outside bodies, constitutional committees and neighbourhood board, plus an updated schedule of meetings. Thirdly, I have some sad news, and I must report the passing of a former councillor and Liberal Democrat colleague of mine, Brian Lowe, who incidentally I believe also went to the same school as Councillor Frank Harwood and me. Councillor Skelton, would you like to address the Chamber, please?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Brian Lowe was from Derby, and as you've just said, he and Councillor Frank Harwood went to school together, so I believe have known each other since they were about 5 years old. After school, Brian at some point went into the army, and over the years, Brian has played a very active role in the Royal British Legion here in Derby. While he was with the Royal British Legion, he was very active there and took quite a leading role in a number of their committees, and I know he held the position of treasurer, I think, in a number of the branches. In recent years, walking became very difficult for Brian, but he nevertheless never missed Remembrance Sunday in November, although for the last 2 years he did have to sit for the ceremony rather than stand. After military life, Brian returned to Derby, and he worked for some time at various co-op shops within the city. After that, he then worked for BREL for many years until his retirement, and it was after that that he started to get politically active. He was first elected to the council in May 2002 and served the residents of Abbey Ward for 9 years. He was on a variety of committees and boards, including licensing, various scrutiny boards, Disabled People's Advisory Committee, quite a number of appeals panels. Public transport was the interest of his, so he was on the bus user group, and he also had a year on Planning Control Committee. Brian was a very quiet person who just got on and did what needed to be done without any fanfare. One Christmas, I remember him telling me a distressed resident phoned him in need of being taken to hospital and had nobody to assist her. So Brian dropped everything and took her down to A&E. And I think this is just typical of the sort of person he was, a very decent, honourable and loyal person. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Skelton. Any other group members want to say anything about Councillor Lowe? Councillor Harwood.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. Yes, Brian and myself went to Sturgis School. It seems a popular school today in view of the fact that even the Mayor went to Sturgis and we were good friends. In fact, I've got a photograph of Brian in the class taken in 1948, okay, and it is black and white, that's all they had in those days, as you well know. But there were better photographs than what they are today, very clear. Anyway, Brian was a good friend of mine, and we part of the company really when we both went our separate ways after we left Sturgis. Brian went off to work for the Co-op. I went off to do an apprenticeship at British Rail, Loco Works. We bumped into each other occasionally. Brian obviously went into the forces before me because those days he had to go at 18, so Brian went off at 18 and spent quite a lot of time in Germany. But our friendship continued after he came out. He eventually went down, as quite Rufus said, to work at the railway. But he always liked the Co-op for some reason or other. So he went back to the Co-op and actually worked there until he retired. Brian, for his sins, was instrumental in me joining the Lib Dems, to be honest. Came up to our house and said, Frank, we want you to come and join us. And he got me to join the Lib Dems, and most people know what happened from there on. Okay. Like myself, yes, he was passionate about the Royal British Legion, and as you know, I'm president of the Royal British Legion for Oakwood, and I'm proud that Brian was part and parcel of our association. He was a very nice person, very quiet and reserved. He was a good friend, and it was a sad day on his funeral. I would like to say this, that I was really pleased that the Mayor of Derby was there that day, which was really tremendous, I thought. But yes, Brian was a good friend, and sad about his going.
Thank you, Councillor Harwood. Sorry.
Yes, briefly, I think a lot has been said already. I just add one little thing that he was on the railways for a long time, and unfortunately he was badly treated when the railways were privatised in terms of his pension, and that was something which affected him. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ashburner. I must also report the passing of one of our independent members. Derek Heal has been a member of the Council Schools Admission Panel for many years, and more recently he's been involved with the IRP, which we'll be debating later tonight. I now invite all councillors to stand for a moment's silence in respect of Brian and Derek.
Councillor Rawson wanted to speak on the other death of Brian.
Sorry.
So.
Sorry. Right, thank you all very much for that. Sorry, I apologise. Did Councillor Rawson want to say something? We'll do it out of order then. Sorry, Martin.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just on behalf of the Labour Group, just to say a few words on behalf of Councillor Lowe. I didn't know Councillor Lowe very well, but we did serve on a number of committees and overview and scrutiny panels together. And I did always find Brian to be very diligent and took a real interest in whatever overview and scrutiny panel he was on. I do also remember him being on licensing committee as well. So just to pass on our condolences from this side of the chamber, Mr. Mayor.
Right. Item 11 is approval of minutes from the Council Cabinet. What minute 12017 and 15317. Are you likely to move those, Councillor Rawson?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, move as printed.
Do we have a seconder? Thank you. Where are they? Oh, it's further on. Yeah, it's okay. Right, that's done. Item 12, election of the leader of the council. Councillor Poulter, as the new leader of the council, would you like... Oh, sorry. Thank you. Sorry. Please, can I have any nominations for leader of the council? Thank you, Matthew.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I would like to nominate Councillor Chris Poulter.
I'll second, Mr. Mayor.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, I would like to nominate Councillor Lisa Eldred, please.
It will now be a recorded vote then.
Councillors, if you'd please indicate whether you are in favour of... That's a good, yeah. As I read out your names, if you would indicate whether you're in favour of Councillor Poulter or Councillor Eldred, please. Councillor Afzal. Councillor Anderson. Councillor Ashburner.
Councillor Poulter.
Councillor Barker. Councillor Bayliss. Councillor Bettany. Councillor Kerr. Councillor Cooper. Councillor Zinzer. Councillor Eldred. Councillor Evans. Councillor Froggatt. Councillor Graves. Councillor Grimmadell. Councillor Harwood. Councillor Hassel. Councillor Heselgrave. Councillor Alison Holmes. Councillor Matthew Holmes. Councillor Hudson. Councillor Hussain. Councillor Jackson. Councillor Keith. Councillor Jangir Khan. Councillor Shiraz Khan. Councillor Marshall. Councillor McChrystal. Councillor Nater. Councillor Nawaz. Councillor Peatfield. Councillor Adrian Pegg. Councillor Paul Pegg. Councillor Potter. And Councillor Poulter. Councillor Raju. Councillor Rawson. Councillor Repton. Councillor Ralston. Councillor Russell. Councillor Russell. Councillor Sandhu. Councillor Shankar. Councillor Skelton. Councillor Smale. Councillor Stanton. Councillor Webb. Councillor West. Councillor Williams. Councillor Willoughby. Councillor Winter. Councillor Wood. And the Mayor, Councillor Carr.
Councillor Poulter. The voting is 28 to 23 in favour of Councillor Poulter, so I declare Councillor Poulter as the new leader of the council. Councillor Poulter, as the new leader of the council, would you like to announce your council cabinet, please?
I would, Mr. Mayor. Thank you very much. If you'll indulge me just a few words in relation to my obvious acceptance of the nomination to lead the council with a minority Conservative group. Just a few little thank yous first. The first thank you to the voters of Spondon, who chose to, the 72% of the voters in Spondon who decided to re-elect me this year. But moreover to the electorate of the City of Derby, who obviously responded to our pledge, our manifesto, to bring a new start to this city. A new start in many ways, a new, open, transparent, more communicative way of going about the business of the council. Hopefully that will be indicated and followed through tonight, but it certainly will be by myself and the members of my group and the cabinet members I'm shortly going to announce. There's one other thank you, and that's in relation to the support of other members of this council from other groups. The council members, the public and the media will be aware that it took some time in negotiations with other groups to reach an understanding, an acceptance that in their view and certainly mine, the best way forward for the city in this next year is for a minority Conservative administration. The hook to that, the key to that agreement was entirely around our acceptance and our drive for the need to look at a different way of governance for this city, to help us install confidence in us through the public, and that's by way of moving towards a committee system. That was easily agreed. In fact, it was a prime function or a prime item in all of our manifestos. That was agreed. There's been a discussion around how that will be done, and it's agreed that that will be done absolutely as soon as practicable, that we will form a working group with a representative of all parties, provided the invitation is accepted by the Labour members here, with a view to researching, organising, agreeing and implementing, going through the motions of implementing a committee system to the council, which will provide dividends in terms of communication and openness and transparency for the council. How long that is going to take, how long is a piece of string? We just don't know. What we can guarantee is that the working group that's set up to do that will ensure that it's done at the earliest opportunity, without delay, and we'll drive towards that. So that's the thread, that's the hook of agreement between the groups that's come together tonight, and I thank them for supporting the formation of a Conservative cabinet on an interim basis to carry out the business of the council whilst arrangements are made in relation to the transition to a committee system. You will have seen a detailed manifesto from the Conservative group and other parties in the city. You will have seen that there are many similarities between ours and the Liberal Democrat and the UKIP manifestos that were published. Those are the key issues, those are the key priorities that were talked about in discussions. There is no long list, there is no final list of things we have to do. Each and every item that comes towards Cabinet will be dealt with on its own merits. And we anticipate that in the main there will be cooperation, because they are priorities for all the groups, that we will be able to drive through what's needed for the city. Over and above that, I just want to describe to you the strengths within my group and my appointment to cabinet posts for the city. I am absolutely delighted that we were able to maintain our leadership group. Councillor Holmes, Councillor Barker and I have worked together for several years, an absolutely unbreakable strong commitment between us, and an absolutely fantastic leadership group towards taking the city forward. I'm delighted that Matt's my deputy, and my right-hand man, Mick, has been supportive of me for many years before this, even in our days in the police force. So I welcome him to that cabinet. We will divide the portfolios of the leader, the deputy leader, and head of governance and HR, etc., between us, and we will publish details of the portfolios that we will have responsibility for. Over and above that, I'm able to announce a fantastic cabinet setup because we have experienced members, and the first one I referred to is Councillor Roy Webb. I'd like to say the father of the house, Roy, are we? Yeah, it goes back longer than I can remember in terms of council business. He has massive knowledge on the adults, health and housing field. He's been cabinet member before, and we know that he will do a fantastic job for us in that field. Moving on from there, we have another experienced cabinet member who's run the role before for Children and Young People Services in the city with a fantastic record previously. She has kept herself up to speed entirely with current events, and I'm absolutely confident that she can carry out the role that we've given her in an excellent manner. So welcome to the Cabinet in that respect, Yvonne, again. Moving on from there, we are going to have a post that is going to fulfil a crucial role in this next year in terms of finance and budgeting, and also with responsibility for a plank of our manifesto that we need to look extremely close at how we go about procuring business, procurement, and within the council. And that's going to be, now she's behaving herself again, I'm going to announce that it's going to be carried out by Nicola Ralston. In relation to leisure and culture for the city, again we have a past holder of the post, a member of this community and this council who, if there's somebody who doesn't know and hasn't shaken hands with yet, well, we've yet to find him. There's somebody will come out of the woodwork. But Alan Grimmadell's done this role in the past. He knows the city inside out. He's already invested in the leisure, culture and tourism activities within the city, and he will perform that role for me. Another important plank of our manifesto is the declaration that we will be conducting a deep clean in this city. One of our main priorities is to restore pride in our city by cleaning it up, by investing in it, by looking at the infrastructure and improving it. And to do that, initially that role, then Councillor Jonathan Smale from Chaddesden Ward will conduct those duties as Cabinet Member for Communities, Place and Street Pride. So that, I believe, completes my Cabinet, Mr Mayor. I endorse that arrangement to you. I will fill in the details later on with details, exact details of the portfolios and how they'll be led when we've had opportunity to do so. Save that to say, we look forward to the opportunity to move Derby forward. We will move it forward. There will be challenges. We're only just finding out the extent of those challenges, and that's been interesting already. But we will deliver for the residents of Derby who called for change, who called for a better way of working, and that's what they'll get with this Conservative administration, Mr Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Poulter. I'll now move on to item 14, which is the endorsement of the Youth Mayor. In a moment, I'll invite the outgoing Youth Mayor and Deputy Youth Mayor to receive certificates, and I'll ask our new ones to make a declaration of oath before Council. But first, I have to move the recommendations printed at item 14. I move those. Do we have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Williams. All those in favour? Any against? Right, we'll move on then. Are they here somewhere? Can you come up to the front then, please? Sorry, can you come up to the front?
Could you sign the certificate?
Sorry, if you can repeat after me. I, Federico Almeida,
I, Federico Almeida,
having been elected
to
the office of Youth Mayor of the City of Derby,
to the office of Youth Mayor for the City of Derby,
declare that I
declare that I
take that office upon myself
take that office upon myself
and will duly and faithfully fulfil the duties of it according to the best of my judgment and ability.
according to the best of my judgment and ability.
I affirm my commitment
To representing the young people of our city,
represent the young people of our city, and I pledge to take every opportunity presented to me by virtue of my role as a youth mayor
presented to me by virtue of my role as youth mayor
to do so.
I
I undertake to conduct myself in a manner befitting an elected representative
in a manner befitting of an elected representative
of the young people of Derby.
of the young people of Derby.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hi, Sonia. I, Sonia Sebastian,
I, Sonia Sebastian,
having been elected
have been elected
to the office of Deputy Youth Mayor of the City of Derby,
to the office of the Deputy Youth Mayor of the City of Derby,
declare that I take that office upon myself
declare that I take that office upon myself
and will duly and faithfully fulfil the duties of it
fulfil the duties of it
according to the best of my judgment and ability.
according to the best of my judgment and ability.
I affirm my commitment
I affirm my commitment
to representing the young people of our city,
to representing the young people of our city,
and I pledge to take every opportunity presented to me by virtue of my role as Deputy Youth Mayor
presented to me by virtue of my role as Deputy Youth Mayor
to do so.
to do so.
I undertake to conduct myself
I undertake to conduct myself
in a manner befitting an elected representative
in a manner befitting an elected representative
of the young people of Derby.
of the young people of Derby.
Thank you very, very much. We now move on to item 15, schedule of meetings. You have before you the schedules of the meetings for the forthcoming year, which I now move. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Poulter.
Councillor Stanton.
And Councillor Stanton. Did you want to speak, Councillor Stanton? Sorry.
Just briefly, Mr Mayor, I'd like to recommend that the Conservation Advisory Area Advisory Committee, if it's currently has a start time of 5:15, I'd like to recommend that that's changed to 6 p.m. in alignment with, well, virtually the rest of the committees of this council.
Sorry, Councillor Skelton.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Just correcting an error, really, on the children and young people scrutiny. Oh, sorry, is that item 16? Doesn't have it. Got a bit ahead of myself. Next item, sorry.
Does anybody want to speak? Oh, Councillor Wood.
Yes, on the moving of the time of the Conservation Area Advisory Committee, which I have sat on for 39 years, and it has always met at 5:15. I think Councillor Stanton may have a good point, but I think we ought to consult the people who actually sit on that advisory committee to see if it's convenient for them. There are 3 councillors and a lot of outside independent people who give their time freely to be on it, and I did suggest that we put it to the first meeting of that committee rather than decide for them this evening.
Councillor Repton.
Yeah, Chair, the
The committee isn't a gentleman's club. We're not like with Jacob Rees-Mogg in the 18th century. People do have to work. We need to involve the most number of people that we can. And I think we should be flexible. And I think that committee should come into the 21st century, and it should allow people who do work for a living, as well as a councillor, can take part in that. I think that's in everybody's interest. It's not party political. It's in the interest of Derby to do that. And I would urge all parties, because it's not a party political point, to accept the proposal that's been made. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Kerr and then Councillor Graves.
In this day and age, it isn't the 18th century, 19th century or the 20th century. In the 21st century, people's working hours are no longer 9 till 5. People work long shifts into the evenings. People may have early shifts in the mornings. And I think we can no longer say that 6 o'clock is a time that everyone can make. We are very much indebted to the advice and the experience that our non-elected members who sit on Conservation Area Advisory Committee give to the Council. And I think that Councillor Wood is correct in saying that we need to choose a time which is convenient to the people who bring their expertise to us and not just to those who are members of the Council.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Kerr. Councillor...
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I can see the Labour Party are starting as they mean to go on. I too think that Councillor Wood is quite correct. It should be coming from the committee itself. If they wish to change it to 6 o'clock, then let them decide amongst themselves. I'm sure that there'll be an amicable arrangement. However, the main reason I stood up is because the SACRE, you've got a meeting down on the 26th of January, which is a Saturday. I presume that's wrong.
Councillor Stanton.
I'm more than happy for this to be taken up by the committee themselves and the members on the committee. It was purely a procedural thing to have this recommendation go through the council. Obviously, if it's not acceptable by the committee, we shall meet when they wish to.
Councillor Stanton, having been a member of the CAC myself for a number of years and noting that you usually arrive at a bit of a lather about 10 minutes late, I can understand where you're coming from. But I think that suggestion and put it back to the committee to consider whether they want to change their time. Take it, is it all agreed now?
Subject to the mistake.
Subject to the mistake that Councillor Graves pointed out. Fortunately, I'm not chairing SACRE anymore. Now move on to item 16, constitutional appointments. You should, excuse me, have before you the constitutional appointments for the year. I have been made aware of 2 changes to the printed document. Councillor Ashburner has been omitted as the Liberal Democrat nomination as a member of the CYP board, and rather than Councillor Repton showing on the Executive Scrutiny Board, this should be Councillor Jahangir Khan, who as chair of one of the scrutiny review boards would become a vice chair of Executive Scrutiny. Are there any other changes Councillor wish to make before we move to the vote? Who was first? Councillor Eldred.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I would like to nominate Councillor Stanton as chair of the Executive Scrutiny Board.
Have a seconder. Right. Okay. Councillor Bayliss.
My item's another item, Mayor. Deal with this first and come back to me.
Those in which one do I? Right. Okay. Who do we go? Oh, they want to. It's a recorded vote. Sorry.
Councillors, if you would please indicate whether you are in favour of Councillor Graves as Chair of Executive Scrutiny Board or Councillor Stanton as Chair, as I read out your names, please. Councillor Afzal. Councillor Stanton. Councillor Anderson. Stanton. Councillor Ashburner. Councillor Graves. Councillor Barker. Councillor Graves. Councillor Bayliss. Councillor Stanton. Councillor Bettany. Councillor Graves. Councillor Kerr. Councillor Cooper. Councillor Dinser, Councillor Eldred, Councillor Evans, Councillor Froggatt. Councillor Graves. Councillor Grimmadell. Councillor Harwood. Councillor Hassel. Councillor Heselgrave. Councillor Alison Holmes. Councillor Matthew Holmes. Councillor Hudson. Councillor Hussain. Councillor Jackson. Councillor Keith. Councillor Jangir Khan. Councillor Shiraz Khan. Councillor Marshall. Councillor McChrystal. Councillor Nater. Councillor Nawaz. Councillor Peatfield. Councillor Adrian Pegg. Councillor Paul Pegg. Councillor Potter. Councillor Poulter. Councillor Raju. Councillor Rawson. Councillor Repton. Councillor Ralston. Councillor Russell. Councillor Sandhu. Councillor Shankar. Councillor Skelton. Councillor Smale. Councillor Stanton. Councillor Webb. Councillor West. Councillor Williams. Councillor Willoughby. Councillor Winter. Councillor Wood. And the Mayor, Councillor Carr.
The voting is 28 for Graves, 23 for Stanton, so Councillor Graves is duly chair of the committee. Right. Who was first there, do you know? Councillor Aldrich, sorry.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Just also on the Disputes Resolution Committee, I'd like to add Councillor Joanna West, along with Councillor Shankar as our representatives on that committee.
Okay, right, okay. Councillor Graves?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Has everybody finished making alterations? Because I've got an amendment. I'm quite happy to do this at the end. Okay, sure.
Hang on a sec, Councillor Bayliss-Mayer.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Could I formally congratulate you becoming Mayor and Councillor Poulter being elected Leader of the Council. I've got a formal amendment to move to put into position a possibility of having an additional consultative body similar to Conservation Advisory Committee. This has come out of a recommendation from the Scrutiny Board, and this has just established the principle of support to a consultative body to support economic development and employment, and I formally move it. David Walsh has got a copy to be circulated, so I just formally move it from myself as the outgoing chair of Scrutiny. Yeah.
Do you have a seconder, Councillor Bayliss? Councillor Stanton.
Give it a bit of time to read it, I think.
Oh, sorry. Right, have we all had time to read that amendment? Sorry? Sorry, Councillor Stanton. Right, I'm going to throw this one open to the meeting now. Then, anybody want? Councillor Wood. Sorry. You want to speak, Councillor Bayliss?
I think he said it.
Because I thought you'd said it all at the start.
Well, I wasn't planning to, Mr Mayor.
No.
I mean, this has come out as my duty to present it to Council because it's been missed off this particular agenda item. I think I'm duty bound as the outgoing chair. It's one of our recommendations to bring it here for further consultation and consideration by Council. I'd be remiss in my duty if I didn't do that, which is why I brought it here. This is part of the consultation process. I'm not saying this will end up being set up, but it was part of our discussions, part of the scrutiny process, which is why I bring it here today. We don't have to do anything with it. If we agree it, then obviously it's up to the administration to do the necessary work to consider this, and the scrutiny board that follows on to see whether or not there is merit in doing this. I think there is. The scrutiny board at the time thought there was on a unanimous basis, and therefore I presented to Council on that basis.
Anybody got any? I agree with what you're saying in terms of that's the way it ought to go. Councillor Wood.
This has come as a surprise to us. They haven't had any courtesy of discussing it with the new leadership or any members on this side of the chamber. The suggestion has some merit. We used to have a committee in Economic Development and Tourism Committee in the days when we had committees. And this is one of the committees we could look at under the new structure, very possibly. But as this is suggested, it's interfering with the statutory role of the Planning Control Committee, which I don't think would be a good idea. I don't think it would be good for the very purpose that it would be set up for, which is economic development. If you've got to delay things before they get to the Planning Control Committee, I don't think it's a good idea. I think it's possibly something that in all the discussions with the new committee structure we could look at. But at this stage, I think it's the wrong time to start introducing new consultative committees without having any prior discussion amongst the parties. We're trying to have an administration now where we do things openly and transparently. The public know nothing about this. It would be sprung on them at the last minute, and I don't think we should do it at this stage. Therefore, I oppose this amendment.
Thank you, Councillor Wood. Councillor West.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and may I also offer my congratulations to you and Councillor Harwood. I'm slightly disappointed in Councillor Wood suggesting that other parties didn't know anything about this. There are 8 members of the Regeneration and Housing Scrutiny Board that I think all were at the meeting, the last meeting, but all those who attended certainly were in favour of this proposal. And if it is the same makeup this year as last, then 3 Conservative members and 1 Liberal Democrat were aware of this and are obviously remiss in not reporting back to the rest of their parties. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor West. Councillor Rawson.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. And following in the instead, may I congratulate you and Councillor Harwood as your deputy and wish you well for the year ahead. I do support this amendment. As Councillor West has said, it has been discussed and formed a recommendation of the cross-party overview and scrutiny board. And I do think it will be helpful to Planning Committee to receive additional information and a different point of view in terms of the advice that they're receiving on individual planning applications. Conservation Area Advisory Committee does perform a very important role in protecting the heritage of our city, and the reports that planning get are very full and thorough from the CAT committee. I think, though, it is important as well to balance that information in the decision-making process by receiving information about the impact on the economy of the city and the impact and the benefits potentially that there would be in terms of economic development and regeneration. So that's all the purpose of this amendment is, Mr Mayor, is a means to provide additional information and support to the Planning Committee as they make their decisions. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Rawson. Councillor Kerr, thank you.
For an advisory committee to work, it requires other participants to want to come forward and contribute. So organisations like Marketing Derby and no doubt others, maybe the Business Improvement District, for example, if it's to that area, people who are involved in small businesses in different parts of the city. I'm not on the scrutiny board that put this forward, and I have no knowledge as to whether any of those bodies have even been contacted about this as a proposal. So if they haven't been contacted, that needs to be done before this happens. If they have been contacted, we need to have evidence that they wish to participate in an initiative like this. And I think it's really come too soon without sufficient information. We are about to set up a working party, I hope, across all parties, and I think this needs formally to go to that. So if there's a way that we can formally move this from council business to working party business, I think, Mr Mayor, that's what we should do.
Councillor Russell.
Yeah, thank you, Mr Mayor, and again, congratulations, and to you as well, Councillor Harwood. I just think we need to be a bit clearer on this. The actual amendment reads that subject to council receiving a report on the proposed establishment of said body. So it will come back to council for discussion based on the amendment that Councillor Bayliss is proposing. This is not a fire off the hip sort of thing. This is not new. As Councillor West said, a number of members in this chamber who are on that scrutiny board knew that this was a recommendation of which I understand all the members of that board agreed, and all this seeks to do is simply go off, do the work, bring back a report to the establishment of that committee. That's how I read this amendment. So there will be further discussion and debate as to whether we should then go forward and establish it subsequent to that report.
Thank you, Councillor Russell. Are there any further contributors? Councillor Marshall.
Yeah, thank you, Mr Mayor, and congratulations on the role. Like I said, this comes as a little bit of a surprise, this amendment. Myself, as owns businesses in the Derby area, economic growth and job creation is obviously very close to my heart. But unfortunately, there's not enough information on here to make a judgment on for or against it, really. I think we should really see the report that's come from the Scrutiny Committee and maybe make... Sorry, did I say something funny? Oh, sorry. You threw me now. Like I said, I think it would be a fantastic committee, you know, a fantastic organisation that will look into the economic growth of the city. So, I mean, I'd like to see it really deferred to maybe a later meeting so we can get, like I said, a working party group together in order to look at it in finer detail. But on the amendment tonight, I failed to see what we're actually voting on. Thank you.
Right, I think we seem to be going round the houses. Sorry, I'll take two more. Councillor Stanton and Councillor Bayliss. Now I'm going to move to the vote.
Having seconded the amendment, Mr Mayor, this is not a trap. It sort of feels already that there is steeped in paranoia that somehow this is some sort of bizarre conspiracy. And we only have to go as far as the first line of the amendment to abate some of those fears, subject to council receiving a report. That report should contain some of the things that should maybe address some of the concerns we have. To Councillor Kerr, rather, Marketing Derby presented to the board, the scrutiny board, and therefore this is where this recommendation within that board came from. It was a direct, and that's what they come along, they do their piece, and then we make recommendations to the council. That's kind of how scrutiny works, and I'm deeply worried that if we're really talking about going to a cross-party committee system, that in this chamber already we seem to have such a distrust of recommendations coming from cross-party committees that we're not happy unless we've all been in the room at the time. We have to look at ways in which we have those cross-party members who are closer to the context make recommendations across party, and then we act upon them. Not shoot from the hip, but just act upon them. Having sat on the Regeneration Scrutiny Board for a number of years and the Conservation Advisory Committee, it is clear to me that there is, feeding into the planning process, there is a lot of great work done by CAC that, to ensure that the conservation in this city is a priority. What is clear is not happening is there isn't that equivalent voice coming from those who are trying to promote growth in the city, development, and all it is to add balance. And once again, I return to the amendment itself and say that subject to a council receiving a report, I don't actually think by passing this amendment anything seismic happens this evening. It just purely, as Councillor Bayliss is now, well, potentially may no longer be the chair of the Regen Scrutiny Board, that instead we carry this forward, this recommendation, and it isn't purely kicked into the long grass or lost in the ether. This, I repeat, this is not a trap. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Stanton. This really is going to be the last contribution. Councillor Hussain.
I'll be very quick, Mr. Mayor. I have been told, or Councillor West mentioned, 3 Tory representatives being on the Scrutiny Commission. And if they have actually supported the recommendation in the Scrutiny Committee, I think they ought to get up here and at least agree with the amendment, because if they've supported an idea at the scrutiny stage, why are they keeping their mouth shut here, and why aren't they clarifying to their colleagues that I mean, after all we're suggesting is that we test out the feasibility of such an idea and whether, and then also test the viability of the idea. If they collect material and come back with a recommendation that this hasn't got any legs to take it any further, that would be the end of it. Why are you afraid of exploring this possibility? The idea on face of it seems a good one. Let's test it out. If it doesn't work, it doesn't need to go any further. I don't know why you've been so apprehensive about it. And Councillor Glimmerdale, I'm told actually you were one of the members who were, and Councillor Webb. So why don't you get up and say something either in support or against it, instead of keeping very, very quiet and not making a contribution?
Thank you very much. Right, I'm going to move to the vote then. All those in favour of the amendment, please show. All those against, please show.
I'll make it 26, 24. The amendment's lost.
The amendment is lost. Thank you. Right, are we moving to the vote?
I think Councillor Graves.
Councillor Graves? Oh, sorry. Sorry.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, if we move on then to champions, I would like to nominate from the floor. Disability champion is Councillor Nick Ralston. Minor ethnic communities, Councillor Yvonne Williams. Older people, Councillor Roy Webb. Children and young people, Councillor Steve Willoughby. Sexuality, Councillor Alison Holmes. Gender, Councillor Matthew Holmes. Anti-fraud, Councillor Jed Potter. And corporate safeguarding, Councillor Yvonne Williams.
Thank you, Councillor Barker. Councillor Repton.
I thought the Conservatives, certainly nationally, they were rightly trying to highlight the issues about mental health. Now, currently I'm the mental health champion. There's no mention of mental health at all. Hopefully you're going to continue with having a champion for mental health. I'm prepared to do that, but it depends on the Conservatives whether they think it's important enough to have a champion for that important area. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
That seems to be acceptable to the Conservative group, Councillor Repton. Thank you very much. Sorry?
Sorry, Mr Mayor, we accept the principle. We're just discussing who we might nominate in relation to champion for mental health. So we're going to nominate Councillor Ralston.
Okay. Councillor Eldred.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I have one final amendment. The Health and Wellbeing Board, I believe there should be 2 Labour representatives, so I'd like to nominate Councillor Repton to be our additional representative on that board.
Sorry, I can't hear.
It's a matter for the leader to decide if he's happy with it, and that's fine.
Are you happy with that, Councillor Poulter?
Mr Mayor, I understand there's not an actual allocation. It's not a number. It's something within my gift, if you like, to nominate to that. From my point of view, if Councillor Repton obviously has an interest in this field, he's prepared to sit and help this in this field, then I can accept Councillor Repton as part of that arrangement. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you very much, Councillor Bolter. Councillor Kerr.
Mr Mayor, if there's an opportunity here to highlight the importance of champions, we have in the past had a cycling champion in... and at a time... and at a time when we know that the air quality is really important...
Come on, please let her speak. Sorry, without...
Sorry. And at a time when we know that air quality is a really important issue within the city, and that encouraging more people to cycle is one of many ways in which we need to be addressing that issue, I think it might be timely for us to have a cycling champion again. Mr Mayor, if people wish me to do that role, I'm happy to do it.
I thought you were already doing it, Lucy.
Lucy, you have the job.
Mr Mayor, just as it's been raised, one final point. I don't propose to interfere in this, but the city does have a beer champion already.
Councillor Eldred.
Sorry, Mr Mayor, can I just clarify whether or not there was a nomination for the minority ethnic communities champion?
Yes.
There was. Okay, thank you.
Councillor Grave.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I've just got a procedural amendment to this motion, and this is, if you want to share it out. Sorry? Yeah, you've seen it, yeah. Can I be the recycling champion? So I got one, thanks. You like it? From the snooker shop. No, it's not. It's just a waistcoat. It's from everywhere. Dragons. Now, Mr Mayor, I understand that I need 17 councillors to agree this, to raise this debate, is that right? So do you want to do that first?
The nature of this amendment is such that I think what you're actually requesting is a working group. It may involve a future rescission of previous council decisions, but at the moment, as I read the nature of the amendment, I think it is to agree the establishment of a working group to look into these issues. So I think if the point is not taken and disputed, then I think you don't need the 17. But I'm sure you have the 17, or
Thank
you
you
would
very
be
much.
moving the amendment.
Yeah. Okay, I'm not going to speak too long on this. I see this as a procedural motion, amendment. It is about our commitment from all the three parties that have come here to agree on a committee system. We want to move from the current cabinet system to a committee system. We are in agreement in all our three parties. So this procedural amendment actually takes us through that by informing the council, getting the council to vote positively for that transition, and also for setting up a cross-party working group of all parties to ensure that we can move that forward, Mr. Mayor. So I commend it to the council.
Thank you, Councillor Graves. Is there a seconder for this?
Mr. Mayor, I wish to second that proposition. Thank you.
Are you going to speak now, or do you want to speak later?
I'd like to reserve my right. Thank you.
Thank you very much. You wish to speak on this? Councillor Eldred.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and now congratulations to you and Councillor Harwood on taking up your positions today. I think that this was mentioned by Councillor Porter in his speech this evening. I'm not sure it necessarily requires a constitutional amendment. I trust that when Councillor Porter says he's going to set up a cross-party working group, that that's what he's going to do. And certainly, as a Labour group, we'd be happy to participate in that group to explore the options going forward. I think that there are probably other issues other than the committee system that we would like to raise as part of that working group, but we're happy to go ahead on the word of the Leader of the Council that working group will be established, and we'd be happy to participate in it. I don't think it requires an amendment.
Sorry, are there any other comments? No. Councillor Kerr.
I think that there is no harm in doing belt and braces, so why not? Is there no reason against it?
And Councillor Repton.
Mr. Mayor, yes, I'm a little bit interested because this coalition of different parties, we haven't started off very well. We've got the UKIP leader suggesting that it'd be done before the next annual general meeting. We've got the leader of the Conservatives not being specific. Can we have some clarification? Are you on the same page? Is it going to happen before the next AGM or after the next AGM?
I don't think anybody wishes to respond to that, Councillor Repton. I think we'll just... Shall we vote on the amendment then? Yeah. Sorry, we'll just take a vote on the amendment then. All those in favour, please show. Any against? That amendment is carried. Are there any more? All those in favour of item 16?
What we?
Yeah, constitution appointments.
All right.
Any against? Item 17, neighbourhood chairs.
The ones with blanks, we need nominations for.
Right, okay.
Yeah.
I will just go through this list. First, the ones that I don't have a chair for at the moment is Abbey, no chair. Allestree is Councillor Hassel. Alveston is Councillor Graves. Arboretum, no name at the moment. Blaygreaves, Councillor Nater. Bolton, no name at the moment. Chaddesden, Councillor Smale. Chelliston, Councillor Grimmadell. Darley, no name at the moment. Derwent, Councillor Hudson. Littleover, Councillor Kerr. Mackworth, no name. Mickleover, Councillor Alison Holmes. Normanton, no name. Oakwood, Councillor Harwood. Sinfin, no name. And Spondon, Councillor Ralston. So I'll start back at Abbey. Do we have a nomination for Abbey?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, nominate Councillor Afzal.
Are there any other nominations? Do we just take that as carried? That's carried. Arboretum.
Sorry, Mr. Mayor, I have a nomination for Alveston. I'd like to nominate Councillor Bayliss.
For Alveston?
Yes, please.
And I presume we need to take a vote on that. We already have Councillor Graves as a nomination there. We will need to take a vote on that. All those in favour of Councillor Graves? Who was the other one? All those in favour of Councillor Bayliss? Councillor Graves is therefore chair of the Alveston board. The next one is Arboretum.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, I'd like to nominate Councillor Hussain.
Do we have any other nominations? Blaygreaves, Councillor Nater. Do we have any other nominations?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, I'd like to nominate Councillor Raju.
All those in favour of Councillor Nater? Those in favour of Councillor Raju? Councillor Nater is chair of the Blaygreaves Board. Bolton Ward.
Yes, Mr Mayor, I'd like to nominate Councillor Anderson.
Councillor Anderson is chair of Bolton Ward. Chaddisden, Councillor Smale. Do we have any other nominations?
Yes, Mr Mayor, I'd like to nominate Councillor Winter.
Those in favour of Councillor Smale? Those in favour of Councillor Winter? Councillor Smale is chair of the Chaddisden Board. Sorry? Right. Chelliston, Councillor Grimmadale, do we have any other nominations? Councillor Grimmadale is chair of the Chelliston Board. Darley, do we have a nomination for the Darley Ward?
Yes, Mr Mayor, I'd like to nominate Councillor Repton.
Do we have any other nominations? No. Councillor Repton is chair of the Darley Ward. Derwent, Councillor Hudson. Do we have any other nominations for Derwent?
Yes, Mr Mayor, I'd like to nominate Councillor Rawson.
I thought you might. Right. All those in favour of Councillor Hudson? Please show. All those in favour of Councillor Rawson? Councillor Hudson is chair of the Derwent Board. Littleover, Councillor Kerr. Any other nominations for Littleover? No? Councillor Kerr is chair of the Littleover Board. Mackworth then. Do we have a nomination for the Mackworth Board?
Yes, Mr Mayor, I'd like to nominate Councillor Froggatt.
Do we have any other nominations? No. Councillor Froggatt is duly chair of the Mackworth Board. Mickleover, Councillor Alison Holmes. Do we have any other nominations for Mickleover? I don't think we'll take a vote on that. Councillor Alison Holmes is chair. No, quiet. Normanton Ward. Do we have a nomination, please?
Yes, Mr Mayor, I'd like to nominate Councillor Jangir Khan.
Do we have any other nominations for the Normanton Ward? Councillor Jangir Khan is duly elected chair of the Normanton Board. Oakwood, Councillor Harwood. Do we have any other nominations for Oakwood? Councillor Harwood is chair of the Oakwood Board. Sinfin, do we have a nomination?
Yes, Mr Mayor, I'd like to nominate Councillor West.
Do we have any other nominations for the Sinfin Ward? No. Councillor West, you're chair of the Sinfin Board. Spondon, Councillor Ralston. Do we have any other nominations for the Spondon Ward? No, you're not nominating your leader then? No. Okay, all right. Councillor Ralston, you are chair of the Spondon Board. Councillor Graves, you wish to speak?
Yes, Mr Mayor. I just wanted to point out what's just happened here is the neighbourhood boards where there are a majority of councillors from a particular party have proposed their candidate for the chairman of the board. Where they're not a majority, we haven't. So, for instance, you'll notice that we didn't force Councillor Bethany onto the Bolton board, for instance. And there was another one in Chaddisden, for instance. Sorry, Mackworth, beg your pardon. What we'd like to do, I think, and I think this is part of the openness, is that we should allow the boards themselves to nominate their own chairman of the boards, rather than do this rigmarole, chairman of the roles, rather than going through this rigmarole of letting political parties force chairman onto particular areas. So I just like to make that note, and you'll note that the Labour Party tried to force their chairman on these neighbourhood boards. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Graves. I think that's noted, and you make a good point actually, but we'll... Thank you. Item 18, appointments to outside bodies and charities. Does anybody wish to speak? Councillor Barker.
Yes, thank you, Mr Mayor. There are a couple of 2 or 3 amendments that I'd like to put forward from the floor. Derbyshire Sport, can I please withdraw Councillor Harwood, and with the good grace from the Liberal Democrat Party, can I nominate Councillor Nater instead, please? Secondly, Disability Direct, which was a vacant slot. Could I nominate again from the floor Councillor Nicola Rawson? Thank you for that. Turning over the page, Community Action for Derby. We already have Councillor Smell down there. There are 2 appointments required, and I would nominate Councillor Potter as that second appointment. Derby Homes Board. Can I ask that we remove Councillor Webb and in place nominate Councillor Cooper instead? And that is the amendments as I've got them. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Comments then, please. Councillor Aldred.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I also have a number of amendments and additions. For Community Action Derby, for the second, we'd like to nominate Councillor Linda Winter. For Derby Dance Centre Development Board, we'd like to nominate Councillor West. For the Derby Homes Board, it should actually be Councillor Fareed Hussain instead of Councillor Bayliss, so that's a correction. Moving over. In terms of direct help and advice, we'd like to nominate Councillor Raju. For the Derbyshire Rape Crisis, we would like to nominate Councillor West. For the Derwent Valley Mills Partnership, Councillor Stanton. For Disability Direct Management Committee, we would like to nominate Councillor Peatfield. For the Guru Ravidas Sabha Community Centre Management Group, we'd like to nominate Councillor Sandhu. For the Indian Community Centre Executive Committee, we'd like to nominate Councillor Dinser. For the Local Authorities World Heritage Forum, Councillor West. And 1 nomination for the LGA General Assembly, Councillor Martin Rawson. Apologies. For the Museums Trust, we'd like to nominate Councillor West.
We'll need to be having some votes on those.
Looks like Councillor Rawson.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. For the LGA General Assembly, I'd also like to nominate Councillor Eldrick, please. Thank you.
It'll take a moment to sort that out because I think we need some votes on these.
Yep.
Just point out, by the way, that there's supposed to be a cabinet member on the Derby Homes Board, and the 3 people we've now got, none of them are cabinet members. So, sorry. That's okay. So getting conflicting advice there.
Derby Health and Advice, we've got Councillor Grimdale and Councillor Raju.
Which one? Can you
Derby Health and
Help and Advice.
Derby Health, Direct Help and Advice. We've got Councillor Grimdale and Councillor Raju.
Do we have a vote on that?
Yeah.
We do that one first.
Yeah. Okay.
What was it? Health and advice.
And help.
Derbyshire. Sorry.
Direct Help.
Direct Help and Advice.
Right, and it's who?
It's Councillor Grimdale and Raju.
So the first one I'm going to come to is Derbyshire Direct Help and Advice, where we have a contest between Councillor Grimmadell and Councillor Raju. So I'm going to take a vote on that first. Those in favour of Councillor Grimmadell, please show. Those in favour of Councillor Raju. So Councillor Grimmadell, you are a member of Derbyshire Direct. The Disability Direct Management Committee, where we have Councillor Ralston and Councillor Peatfield. Those in favour of Councillor Ralston, please show. Those in favour of Councillor Peatfield. So Councillor Ralston, you are appointed. Appears to be it. I'm informed I was wrong about the Derby Homes thing, so... Do I need to take a vote on item 18 then? Or is it just...
Yeah, just move it.
Right.
Did they nominate Winter? Okay, sorry. Yeah, there's a third one.
Sorry, there is a third one, Derby Dance. Is it Derby?
Three candidates for this one.
Community Action Derby.
Yeah. Smale, Potter and Winter.
Smale, Potter and Winter.
So we have Councillor Smale and Councillor Potter. I'll take... and I thought it says proposed under. Oh, I see. So it's Potter versus Winter. Yeah. So it's Councillor Potter and Councillor Winter. Those in favour of Councillor Potter, please show. Those in favour of Councillor Winter. So Councillor Potter is appointed. Councillor Smale was nominated, but I take it that will go through anyway. Thank you. Sorry, the legal people tell me we need to vote on all three of them and then drop the lowest number. So
It's 2 out of 3.
It's the 2 out of the 3. So we have Councillor Smale, Councillor Potter and Councillor Winter.
Yeah.
So we'll take Councillor Smale first, please. Those in favour. Councillor Potter. Those in favour of Councillor Potter.
Yeah, 27 again.
Okay. Councillor Smale and Potter are duly appointed.
Mr Mayor, while we're on a roll, I did omit one actually. Derby Dance Centre Development Board. Councillor Grimdale has asked that Councillor Potter goes dancing with him. So if we can have the two, please, or is anybody going to challenge that?
Mr Mayor, can we have a dance off for that one?
Councillor Potter.
Derby.
And Councillor Eldred proposed Councillor West for that, so we need to take a vote on that as well. So we're down to 2 out of 3 again, please. What are the names then? So it's Councillor Potter, Councillor Grimdale and Councillor West. In favour, please show. Councillor Potter. Right. Councillor Grimdale. And Grimdale and Potter are duly appointed. Do we now move to the whole thing?
Just move that vote out.
Right, I'm now moving item 18, Constitution. Oh, sorry, Councillor Russell.
That's all right, Mr Mayor. I'm sure you didn't do it on purpose. At the risk of becoming embroiled with the Tory groups, or the Conservative group's internal discussions, can I raise a point of order for clarification, please? I was under the impression that previously we changed the Council's constitution to reflect that the Cabinet member whose responsibility incorporated housing had to be a board member of Derby Homes. Can I get some clarification from the monitoring officer? Firstly, did we change the constitution to reflect that? And if so, do we not need to revert back? And that would then require a 2/3 majority of the council to do so. And secondly, are those appointments that have just been requested in order?
I think, Mayor, that's a matter we'll need to look into, because certainly I provided advice in relation to the role that a councillor who is a cabinet member can play as a director of Derby City Homes. And there has been, I'm aware, there has been legal advice provided before on this. From my perspective, I'd say that I've given advice on this issue, and the vote that's been taken tonight does accord with that advice. I'll quite happily look into the issue again and look into the previous decisions of this council, and if necessary it can be revisited. But in relation to the actual decision that's been made, I'd have to say it's in accordance with the advice that have been provided today.
Thank you. Councillor Poulter.
Sorry, Mr. Mayor. I was half expecting the Acting Chief Exec for some more clarity there, but just for a little bit more clarity, this whole issue was raised in terms of we wanting to project an open, transparent and absolutely unambiguous administration. We raised it ourselves, the issue of whether or not there was a conflict of interest of being a member of Derby Homes Board and the Cabinet member. On the principle that if you're on the board of the Derby Homes, your function should be to look after the interests of Derby Homes. If you're Cabinet member for housing, your interest should be the interests of the council. There's an obvious conflict there if you have both roles. We took the advice. The advice was that is the case, and it would be inappropriate, and Councillor Webb stood down as a result, and as far as I'm aware, there's a clear understanding that we understand the position was different last year, but we view that this is the correct decision, and we've taken the advice, and that's how it came about. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you for that clarification, Councillor Poulter. Right, we will now vote on item 18, which I have moved. All those in favour of it, as all the discussions have concluded? That's carried. Now, item 19, attendances at annual conferences. Does anybody wishes to speak? Councillor Barker, your microphone's still on. Make the mic, sorry. Right, that being the case, is there a seconder? So I do have a seconder. Thank you, Matthew. Those in favour? Any against? That's carried. Thank you. Item 20. Recommendations of the Independent Remuneration Panel. Councillor Poulter, I understand you wish to address the Council.
Mr. Mayor, yes, thank you. I'm happy to introduce this report. We thought we'd start off with an easy one. So, just to point out, Mr. Mayor, that this is not a report of this administration or the Council. It is entirely the report of the Independent Remuneration Panel, chaired by Narinder Sharma, who I understand was going to come to that. He's here. Thank you very much. Narinder, just to express my thanks to you and the members of your panel for the time and effort that you put into it. It's absolutely clear that you spent a lot of time at it because you hit the issues on the head here in terms of where we're at in relation to allowances for councillors. Not least on the basis that our council has not dealt with this matter for around 10 years. There's been no significant change to the allowances for around 10 years. And because of the way we've responded to previous reports from the Independent Remuneration Panel, we haven't actually had anybody to do it in the last 4 years. The council's not received a report on the situation. So again, Narinder, thank you for putting this team together and doing this. Suffice it to say that it was obviously a difficult report for us to consider early, and it's no exaggeration to say that it's prompted an awful lot of discussion, not just within my own group, of which opinions are varied, but I understand and I'm well aware because it's resulted in conversations between the leaders of all our groups as to how we should go about tackling this, and if there wasn't a consensus on how to do it. My impression is that there is no consensus on how to deal with it. There's absolutely merit in the argument that the councillors in Derby City are paid less on a pro rata basis than other councils in the East Midlands. There's also good merit in the fact that there's a big argument to say that to be able to attract and bring people into local politics on a career basis, the current allowances simply do not encourage people to make a career in local politics from the beginning. I think it's probably accurate to say that probably 99% of the members of this council did not join this council or get into local politics for the money. The report refers to the fact that it's acknowledged that for the level of work and the amount of responsibility and the time that it takes, remuneration for people in the public body is much lower than it would be in the private sector. That's acceptable. That is the norm. That is what people, the members of the public in Derby, would expect. And I don't argue with that, but there is a very well-reasoned argument within the report along those lines. Now, all that said, as I said, referred to, I know there's been a lot of discussion. I know there's been a lot of thought on the matter, and there's been talk about options, whether we could accept some of it, whether some of it could be deferred, whatever. The only rider that I would put to that is we've already committed, in fact all four groups are committed to looking at tonight a different way of governance. With a different way of governance, with a committee system, would automatically bring a change in the roles and responsibilities of the members of the council. Now, that clearly would potentially have an effect on the levels of allowance paid to members. So, whilst I have thanked the members of the panel for their efforts in doing this, there could well be some merit in thanking them, but asking them to consider looking again at councillors' allowances in the course of our deliberations in moving towards transition towards a cabinet system. Committee system. And that more or less, Mr. Mayor, is what I say. I think this report warrants some discussion between us and hear people's views, which I know are or have been diverse on the situation. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Poulter. Does anybody else wish to speak? Councillor Eldred.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think I'd also firstly like to start by thanking Narendra and the Independent Remuneration Panel for the work. We had a brief chat about it this morning, which I think was really helpful. It is really good to see that there is a body looking at the work that we do and trying to somehow quantify the value of that. I think that this was a really difficult discussion for us as a Labour group, and obviously the conversations we've had with the other group leaders as well. And there were different reasons for that, but one of the reasons I think that it was a difficult discussion for us as a group is we think about the context. As a Labour group, we were thinking about the context in which this report appears. And the context in which this report is appearing is that the people we represent aren't getting a pay rise. And in fact, the people who work within this building and within the local authority have not really seen much of a pay rise over the last few years. Public sector workers, NHS staff, teachers, police officers, you name it, we could go with the list, have either been subject to pay freezes since 2010 or the 1% pay cap, which has now slightly been lifted. In fact, public sector households are around £80 a week worse off than they were in 2010. And households where both adults work in the private sector are around £30 a week worse off than they were in 2010. And families hit by the benefit cap, families struggling with universal credit and that transition also aren't getting a pay rise. And that's one of the things that we were talking about and thinking about in our group when we thought about making this difficult decision. And we'd actually rather be in a position to vote for them to get a pay rise. I think also, though, it is worth noting some of the comments of the Independent Remuneration Panel that, just to quote directly, if that's okay, Narendra, that the panel said it's vital that we have an allowance scheme which makes the role of being a councillor suitably attractive to people of all ages and backgrounds. And essentially, if the allowance is low, we won't attract people from diverse backgrounds, and we want to have a diverse range of voices in this chamber and doing the work of councillors, and we do recognise that that is very important, that we don't just want people who are independently wealthy or have a retirement income. We want people from all walks of life to be in this chamber, and we want as diverse a range of people as possible. So there are obviously pros and cons to this, and that's why we had, I think, a challenging, robust debate as a group about the issues. What I would say, which I think is interesting, is that our parliamentary colleagues in Westminster, since 2011, haven't voted on their own allowances, and actually a scheme was established in 2011 which set up an independent panel to set the pay and allowances of members of parliament. So it seems like something of an anomaly that we are in this situation where we are still voting for our own allowances when nationally MPs are not doing that, because it's recognised how difficult it is as a group of elected members to have this discussion. So it might be something that we want to work together to lobby government to change that legislation in the future, to take it out of the hands of elected members. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Eldred. Councillor Williams, would you like to speak?
Thank you. Congratulations, Mr. Mayor. I would actually like to propose an amendment or proposal. I believe it can be delivered.
Oh,
Councillor Eldred, your microphone's still on. Councillor Williams, do you wish to speak in favour of your amendment?
I do, Mr. Mayor. Thank you.
Do you have a seconder?
Sorry?
Is there a seconder?
Is there a seconder? Thank you. As Councillor Poulter and Councillor Eldred have said, I would like to firstly express my thanks to the Independent Remuneration Panel. They've done some fantastic work, and I don't disagree in principle with any of the arguments in there. However, you've got in front of you a form of amendment which actually is, with the exception of Youth Mayor's bursary, which I'd hope that you would agree immediately, is asking to defer decisions on the remaining recommendations on the basis that the majority of the members here tonight are minded to move towards a committee system, and therefore the roles and the responsibility allowances, etc., will all be having to be looked at again shortly. So with respect to that, I would like to respectfully request that following that review of the Council's decision-making arrangements, that the Independent Remuneration Panel would reconsider the Members' Allowances Scheme in full as they see fit thereafter. Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor.
Does anybody else wish to speak? Does the seconder wish to speak? Or shall we just move to the vote?
I'll second and reserve my right to speak. Thank you.
Does anybody else wish to speak? So, Councillor Ralston, do you wish to speak now? No? All right, we'll just move to a vote then. In favour of the amendment, please show. That's carried. Thank you very much. Oh, that was a bit easier than I thought.
Yeah, it's the same thing. We've got to vote on the substantive motion now.
Technically, we still need to vote on the substantive motion, although I don't think as amended, so I don't think it makes much difference, does it? Those in favour of the motion as amended, please show. Thank you very much. Item 21, appointment of the Chief Executive and Strategic Director. Councillor Barker, do you wish to move these recommendations as printed?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Mayor, ladies and gentlemen, it was my privilege just a few short weeks ago to be part of the cross-party interview panel to engage a new Chief Executive for Derby City Council. Those persons present on that day, having survived gruelling tests and pre-interviews, we had the opportunity to question candidates from what was really an outstanding selection of competent administrators from the world of local government. Unanimous agreement was made on the order of the day to ask a serving officer from a different area who has joined us today in this council's AGM. That lady is Mrs. Carol Mills, up there in the gallery. Carol is currently the CEO at Milton Keynes Council, being appointed there in 2014. She has, however, progressed in her career, taking several appointments of both metropolitan and unitary status, not least Walsall, and even more recently, Nottingham City. That was her last appointment before going to Milton Keynes. She therefore joins us, having had great experience at strategic level and as a current Chief Executive. Milton Keynes is not dissimilar to Derby in respect of size nor population. It has for a number of years enjoyed the benefits of a hung council, primarily between Labour and Conservative. It boasts 6 world-famous concrete cows, whilst Derby has a waterfall with no water and an iconic toast rack on the spot. Therefore, Carol should feel quickly at home in our city and hopefully bring with it a wealth of experience and leadership that we are desperate to harness. We greatly look forward to working with her. Plans for delivery and to ensure that Derby blooms in the future as the safe, strong, innovative and ambitious city that both the councillors and residents want. I move to support recommendations 2.1 to 2.3 as printed in endorsing the appointment of Mrs. Carol Mills.
Thank you, Councillor Poulter. Does anybody wish to second that? Councillor Barker, sorry. Anybody seconding that? Come on. Thank you, Matthew. Right. Sorry, Councillor Skelton, I beg your pardon.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just wanted to add, obviously, I was also on that panel, and we unanimously agreed that Carol Mills was indeed the best person for Derby.
Thank you very much. All those in favour? Oh, sorry, Councillor
Evans.
Do you want to speak, Councillor Evans? Sorry, carry on.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I too was on the interview panel, and I do have every confidence in Carol. I think it will be really just what Derby needs. It will put new vitality into the city, and I fully support it. Thank you.
Councillor Rawson wants to speak now.
Councillor Rawson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. To join the club, yes, I too was on the appointment panel, and it was a fun day had by all, not least by the candidates, I'm sure. So from this side of the chamber as well, we would very much like to endorse this appointment, welcome Carol, and look forward to working with her over the coming months and years.
Councillor Hazelgrave.
And I also was on the panel and share all the sentiments that were expressed. There was unanimous support for an outstanding candidate who will help us to go forward into further into the 21st century and become an even greater city than we are now. Thank you.
Chair.
Don't tell me you were on the appointments panel as well, Councillor Repton.
No, I wasn't on the panel, Mr Mayor, but I would like to welcome Carol to this authority, but just remind her that MK Dons are not the mighty Rams.
Yeah, okay, thank you all very much. Councillor Barker.
I don't know whether you want to move on before we take the full vote, because we do have two further paragraphs, 2.4 and 2.5, which I again would endorse for the council to approve the principle of the appointments panel confirming an appointment to the post of Strategic Director of Corporate Resources. So I move to approve the principle of the appointments panel confirming appointment to the Strategic Director of Corporate Resources and to fulfil the statutory duty of the Chief Finance Officer as required under Section 151 of the Local Government Act 1972, and similarly to authorise the appointments panel to make the appointment in due course. I move.
So, to be clear, we're voting on all the recommendations from 2.1 to 2.5. Those in favour, please show. That seems to be unanimous. Thank you all very much. Sorry, section 151. Oh, yeah, that's right, yes. Right, item... oh, sorry, Councillor Bayliss.
Well, could I just thank Christine Durant and Andy, who've been acting up in the meantime, for their service. This council could give them a round of applause, please, Mr Mayor.
Item 22, process for considering complaints about councillors. I understand that Mr Sunderland is going to speak. Is that correct, Philip? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. As a co-opted member of the Standards Committee, I've been asked to present the report dealing with alternative methods of dealing with complaints about councillors. This report fulfills a commitment given in 2017 by the then Cabinet Member of Governance to review the system, which is what the Standards Committee then did at length at our meeting in March this year. The proposals are a result of discussion, amendment and agreement of the three groups and independent co-opted members present at that meeting. The passing of the Localism Act in 2011, which did away with the National Standards Board, it also did away with locally prescribed arrangements. It's subsequently been up to councils to establish their own particular arrangements, as Derby has in fact done so, as everybody else has been required to do so. These arrangements have been increasingly attracting criticism for a variety of reasons. Many of the complaints have been council against councillor. Determination of complaints has been criticised because of the political proportionality of the committee, which is required by statute. The report sets out a range of options which were considered. In the event, a revised procedure was proposed. This is summarised in the diagram at Appendix 4, which looks somewhat complicated, but it was an attempt by David Walsh to ensure that it all got in one sheet of paper. So if you follow it logically, you can actually work through. It doesn't actually as complicated in practice. More importantly, this summarises the process all in one page. That's the key thing. Essentially, the system proposed involves a three-stage process with initial screening, monitoring officer assessment, consultation with independent persons. Details are set out in the report. Only if a matter is deemed to be serious will a full investigation and committee hearing then be carried out. Any complaints of a politically influenced nature would be dealt with by the individual groups. The whole system would be monitored and overseen by the Standards Committee with the involvement of elected and independent members. And that's quite key to ensure that whatever happens in future, it will be monitored by a separate independent body with independent members as well as nominations from the board, from the groups. One key change proposed is that the political proportionality, put my teeth in, the Widdicombe rules be disapplied in this particular case, so that each political group would then have a member on the standards committee. In order for this to be applied, it requires a vote to be carried out with no members voting against. I hope, on behalf of the committee, that this will then take place. In summary, the proposals recognise past criticisms and seek to provide an alternative process moving forward. This should help to ensure that any complaints are handled efficiently and effectively, ensure that officers are not unduly influenced, and ensure that the complaints process is economic and will help to restore public confidence in the council and its members. The whole process to be reviewed when it's been in operation for just over a year. So I propose, on behalf of the members of the board, that I introduce the report. Thank you.
Councillor Poulter.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. First job is clearly in to thank you and the co-opted members for your roles in standards over a long period of time, and with us and with the officers studying and coming up with an appropriate way forward for this council to consider. So again, thank you so much for that. I could, but I'm not going to take the opportunity to grandstand on old issues in relation to standards in any of those forms. That's not appropriate, because that's not what we're here for. We're here to consider a way forward. We know why it was necessary to look at and amend the standards procedures, because they were broken and they weren't working properly. This has been studied and debated by the committee, by council, by the independent members, by officers, and amendments put forward by a number of people have been built into the body of this procedure. I and my group are happy to run with this, particularly happy that membership on the Standards Board is no longer Widdicombe, or would no longer be Widdicombe, that one member from each independent party is going to be sitting on this. There were other safeguards that we needed building in, because in relation to the potential for complaints to be ruled politically motivated, the original proposal was for that to be the decision of the monitoring officer. An amendment was issued to that, and it's agreed that the independent members will take part in that process. There are a number of other ways in which recommendations were put. As I read it and understand it, they have been encompassed in the body of the procedure, and I and my group will be giving this a go, seeing as the way forward, hoping it works, and hoping that it contributes to a new start for Derby, a change in the way councillors conduct themselves. If only we could have 12 months without a complaint generated by ourselves against each other, then that would be a perfect way forward. I hope we all take that opportunity to conduct ourselves better in a more civil manner, communicate better, and alleviate some of the silly problems that we've come across in the past. So yes, we will be supporting this as a positive move forward for the city, Mr. Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Poulter. Is there a seconder? Okay. Who wishes to speak? Anybody? Councillor Skelton.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We do welcome this report. We had, for the previous system, a great deal of misgivings, and for some time, obviously, decided we would not take part in the old way of doing things. This system, I think, gives us much more confidence that obviously any complaints that might be politically motivated will be dealt with appropriately. and that people will indeed get a fair hearing, as obviously under the previous system we felt that that was not possible. So we very much welcome this report, and I do thank Philip Sunderland and his colleagues for what they've produced. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Skelton. Do you wish to speak, Councillor Shanker? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and congratulations to yourself and to Councillor Harwood. Just briefly, as being the member responsible for initiating this review, I've said many times before the previous Standards Committee was broken and was abused by members in this chamber as well on occasions, unfortunately. But putting all that behind us now, the Standards Committee worked with officers and the independent members to come up with a set of proposals which I sincerely hope that all members in this chamber will respect, and to restore confidence in the image of this council when it comes to complaints against councillors, and that's the main driver for this. But it will, as Councillor Poulter has also said, make the whole system more effective and efficient.
That's very encouraging. Thank you, Councillor Shanker. Does anybody else wish to speak? Do the seconders wish to speak? No? Right, in that case, we'll move to a vote. Sorry, all those in favour, please show. That looks unanimous to me. Thank you all very much. We'll move on to item... Oh yes, of course. Yeah. Is there any? Are there anybody? Is there any vote against? No. Thank you. Item 23, updates to financial procedure rules. Councillor Poulter, do you wish to move it as printed?
Chair, yes, please. I move it as printed.
So, all those in favour? That's carried. Item 24, updates to contract procedure rules.
Likewise, Mr Mayor, move it as printed, please.
All those in favour? Yep. That's carried. Thank you very much. Right, well, thank you all for attending. I'd like to apologise for my mishandling of the mic at some stages or other. I will get... No, that's not me, the mic, that the mic. I can assure you I will get better with practice. Thank you all very much. Good night.